Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with the great Charles Coulombe.
And it is September the 8th, the feast of the Nativity of Our Lady, Our Lady's birthday. And ladies and gentlemen, bear in mind, there are only 3 figures who get their birthdays commemorated in the Church's calendar. They are St. John the Baptist, which happens to be the French-Canadian National Day. Just point that out.
Okay.
Our Lady, and our Lord at Christmas. And just think, in only 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the first Christmas decorations will be going up in the stores to match the Halloween decorations. So you have the whole Nightmare Before Christmas thing going on.
Yes.
Isn't that neat?
That's neat.
Yeah, or something. But no, well, that's great. What so what do we have ahead of us today on this overly hot afternoon?
We actually have a coherent theme for this show today.
Wow, I like coherence. It's
yeah.
the 8th gift of the Holy Ghost. Coherence, yeah. It's true.
Okay.
I pray for it regularly. It often eludes me.
Okay, many of you have sent in questions asking Charles, how do you feel about this person? How do you feel about that person? So we've crammed all of those questions into a single episode.
So basically you're telling me that they want me to get in touch with my feelings.
Everyone's going to get in touch with your feelings.
Oh, lucky you. Feelings, nothing more than feelings. Trying to forget. Never mind. All right.
All right.
Did anyone ask about Barbra Streisand?
No.
All right. Well, then we just sang her song. That's all she gets. This podcast. All right. What do we got?
All right. For our first question, what do you think of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Mogmentum in the UK?
Okay. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg is an interesting character. For those of you who are not au courant with UK politics, he's an up-and-coming conservative. He's disliked and loved in equal proportions, probably. One of these people who you either love or hate. He makes no secret about being Catholic. He puts on very snobby airs, which annoys a lot of people. As a friend of mine who comes from, shall we say, a very fine background says, if you really come from a very fine background, you don't need to put on airs. So he doesn't really think much of him in that regard. He's sort of a uber-capitalist in some ways. It was more like an American, quote-unquote, conservative in some ways than a British conservative. At the same time, he's very open about being pro-life and anti-gay marriage. So, is he perfect? Far from it. Is he the best thing on the current UK political scene? Well, let's say I don't see anything better. Except Prince Charles, and he's not running for anything. And he doesn't have Mogg's pro-life stance, so.
Okay. Theo Weeth asks, how do you feel about Leon Degrelle?
The inevitable. Well, firstly, you'll want to know who Leon Degrelle was. And the answer is, he was a Belgian politician, a very controversial figure. Between the wars, he led a movement called the Rexists, from Christus Rex. They started out as an ultra-Catholic wing of the Catholic political party in Belgium, very much into the kingship of Christ and all that kind of stuff, in keeping with Claus Primas. And I think we discussed this last time, the dilemma of the European right when faced with Hitler. How some of them went pro and some of them anti. Yeah. Well, he most unfortunately went with the pro-Nazi wing, and in fact ended up leading the Belgian volunteers fighting the Soviets in Russia. Then he ended up, after the war, going to Spain, where he died. He also, incidentally, and this might interest you or not, is said to have been the inspiration for the character of Tintin, or Tintin, as you would say. You know, the blonde comic kid with the funny hair?
I'm not familiar.
No? Well, for those of you who are, Tintin, supposedly based on Leon Degrelle.
Huh.
What do I think of him? Well, it's a shame he got hooked up with Hitler. In the early days, from what I could judge of his agendas and so forth, his platform, It seemed pretty good. But, you know, who's to say? He certainly didn't end up one of my favorite people.
Okay. Jules Samuels asks, what are your feelings on Girolamo Savonarola?
Savonarola.
Savonarola.
Well, he was a Florentine Franciscan. You may remember that Renaissance Florence was a very decadent place, kind of like LA today, although we don't have the taste and style that they had. Just the decadence and perversion that we have, but the rest we missed out on. We also don't have Savonarola, who denounced all of this and actually for a short time took over control of Florence from the Medici.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was very, very puritanical, had a bonfire of the vanities. That phrase comes from Savonarola's having a big bonfire. Women threw in their party dresses and indecent pictures and all sorts of stuff like that. Savonarola is one of these characters, like Alexander VI, who was the Pope at the time, about whom you find two camps. Some people really love him, think he was the greatest thing since plaid paint. The others think he was terrible, he was a proto-Puritan, proto-Calvinist. I don't know, I wasn't there.
Well, I mean, being against decadence makes you a Puritan?
It depends on how far you go, and he went pretty far.
Okay. Well, that's like asking what's worse, total decadence or Puritanism. I guess they're both bad, but
they're both bad. And where do you fall out in the center? And it's where do you find yourself between them?
Yeah.
But anyway, no. You'll see Savonarola basically by some, and I'm talking about Catholics now, by some hailed as almost a saint, if not a saint. And then others consider the worst thing before John Calvin. I don't know.
Wow.
It's a wildly varied approach.
He must have been unbelievably popular to displace the Medicis.
He was extremely popular, and then he made himself over the year or so that he was in complete control of the city. He made himself very unpopular. You know, initially people were happy to go along with him because Florence, the decadence was so bad, but they didn't like what Savonarola did either. So mobs are funny. You know, as our Lord found out, they'll hail you as the son of David one day and crucify you the next.
Very fickle. Max Wilde would like to know your opinion on King John I. Was he as bad a king as history makes him out to be? And did Magna Carta really subject him to law as many conservatives claim it did?
Here's another character. Two schools. You wouldn't believe they were writing about the same person.
Well, okay.
As far as Magna Carta goes, that certainly was not its intent at the time. Its intent was, if you read Magna Carta as opposed to just talking about it, you'll see that it's couched in terms of the king guaranteeing his loyal subjects, the barons and bishops, their laws and liberty, their already established rights. So in other words, if you read Magna Carta, it doesn't come across as a revolutionary document. We know it was because it was forced on him. And the other interesting thing about it is that Innocent III, the Pope at the time, condemned it. And the reason why he condemned Magna Carta is not because he was against the bishops and barons having their rights confirmed, but because King John had already made England a feudal subject of the Holy See. And so for something like that, as far as Pope Innocent was concerned, to be valid, he should have been consulted. It's a point of law, in other words, and not of content.
I see.
Anyway, to answer your question about John to the best I can, depends on who you read. You know, myself, it depends also on what you're looking for. He certainly lost most of the English possessions in France at the time. And if you think that was a good thing, then John was great. If not, not. And he was the king for when he was Prince John, regent for his brother, King Richard the Lionheart. He was his regency was the setting for Robin Hood.
Wow. Okay. Max Wilde has a second question. Could Charles talk about a relative of mine, King Henry II, and St. Thomas A. Becket?
I could. What's next? I said, no.
Wow.
No, I'm not going to do that to you. Well, basically, Henry II was a Plantagenet, one of the most important members of that family, which later, of course, two branches would destroy England in the Civil Wars, Lancaster and York. But at the time of our story, there was only the main line of Plantagenet.
That's a family?
It's a family.
Okay.
Henry, as we know, he was the father of John and Richard and all those guys, and had a very tempestuous home life.
Okay.
The Lion in Winter is based on him. He had to imprison his wife because of her plotting against him, and she was a toughie. She was no easy bird. St. Thomas of Becket had been his pal in debaucheries and various other things. Then he made him chancellor, because he was already a cleric. They decided to make him Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, he doubtless thought that St. Thomas was going to be simply his creature. It didn't work out that way, because when he became Archbishop of Canterbury, he started putting his office in the church above everything else. And that led him into conflict with the king. And then he ended up having to flee to France, and then he came back. And at one point, he excommunicated the king for withholding church revenues. It just went back and forth, until finally the king was so annoyed, he said, "Well, no one rid me of this tempestuous priest." And so these 4 knights rode to Canterbury, and they killed St. Thomas in the cathedral. But King Henry did public penance for the murder. He denied that he intended him to be murdered, but that's certainly how the knights took him.
Mm-hmm.
And he did public penance, and of course shortly after that St. Thomas of Becket was canonized. It's interesting that at the time of the Reformation, so-called, Henry VIII had a particular hatred for St. Thomas of Becket, because he epitomized an independent church that was not subject to the king. So, amongst other things, he ordered that all images of St. Thomas of Becket be destroyed. If you go to Christ Church Cathedral at Oxford today, they've got all this beautiful medieval stained glass. Well, a large part of it had to do with the miracles of St. Thomas. There's in stained glass, there's an image of St. Thomas, but the head was replaced with a little piece of stained glass. So they wouldn't have to destroy the whole window.
Interesting.
Anyway, so that's Henry and Thomas. What do I think? How do I feel about them? Well, St. Thomas was a saint. Henry was not. But he certainly was a remarkable ruler in that through his marriage to, was it Eleanor of Aquitaine? I forget. Anyway, he already controlled as Duke of Normandy a good chunk of southern France, northern France rather. His marriage gave him a bigger chunk of southern France. And he had a lot of pull in Scotland and Wales and all that, so we talked of him as being one of the great imperial kings amongst the English. Certainly a remarkable man. I mean, not a saint, but remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Michael McElroy asks, what can you tell us about Nicholas of Cusa? I have heard some Catholics praise him and others condemn him as heterodox.
Well, Nicholas of Cusa was a cardinal, which by itself doesn't guarantee anything.
Right.
He was a humanist. That is to say, not humanists today, of course, are people who don't really believe in anything supernatural. A humanist in those days was considered someone who saw humanity as worth exploring, as important. Erasmus was one of these. Reuchlin, there were a lot of these guys.
When did he live?
1400s.
1400s, okay.
Late 1400s. So just before the Reformation. And so for some people, the humanists were the forerunners of the Reformation. They kind of, according to this view, they kind of softened up the church and prepared it for the evils that followed. But by the same token, others will point out that with very few exceptions, most of the famous humanists who were still alive at the time of the Reformation, to include Helgason in Denmark, St. Thomas More in England, Erasmus, Reuchlin, all of those who were alive at the time of the Reformation stayed, or not all, most stayed loyal to the old faith, even though they had criticized elements of practice beforehand. So, again, he's one of these characters who has lovers and haters.
Okay. But your feelings on so many of these are neutral. Okay, you're saying, okay, some people love him, some people hate him.
Yeah. Well, you got to understand, my feelings are neutral because I'm an historian and I don't know. I don't have any special knowledge that allows me to pierce beyond the veil. And most often these characters are at such a remote distance from today.
Well, okay, how about this? Some people love Queen Isabella, some people hate her.
I love her. Next.
See? But you're not... Why don't you give the middle ground for Queen Isabella?
Because I know more about her and I've studied her a lot more.
Oh, you can pierce through the veil.
I can pierce through the veil. No, I've studied her very closely. I mean, a lot of these characters, I know what different sorts have said, but I haven't studied them to the degree that I feel confident in getting any kind of a verdict.
Okay.
I mean, ladies and gentlemen, one of the great fallacies of our time is the idea that you've got to have an opinion on everything. No, you don't. Why should you? As my late father used to say, if the majority of Poles were honest, there's always like 8 or 9% say don't know, don't care.
Yeah.
Well, Dad used to say that if opinion polls and the people who answered them were honest, you'd probably get a majority in any major question saying, I don't know or I don't care.
Ah.
So don't be afraid to say, I don't know, or I don't care, or I don't have an opinion. Because you know what? An opinion that is based upon prejudice rather than facts is worse than no opinion at all.
But see, there's a huge problem with doing that, though, is that you admit you're ignorant or apathetic.
Oh, truth is so horrible. It's so terrible. I hate truth. Again, ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing wrong with admitting that you're apathetic or ignorant, or both. And as I say, in the areas that we have mentioned, I have read very eminent historians, and they come to completely opposite conclusions. Now, if I accept that historian A is far better qualified, far better studied than I am, and I admit that of his opponent, how am I supposed to come up with a conclusion?
Okay.
How am I supposed to do that? Can I read all these dead languages? No, I cannot. Am I fully conversant with all the contemporary literature? No, I am not. I'm taking everything I know on second-hand witnesses anyway. And when the eminence of these second-hand witnesses is equally great, on what basis am I supposed to form an opinion?
Okay.
Now, that's not true on some characters. With Isabella, her contemporaries, and really those historians who were not obligated to have a contrary view for reasons of employment or whatever, they're all pretty much in agreement that Isabella was a great individual. More than that, she's a servant of God. She's on the edge of beatification. So I don't even have to worry now. My good opinion on Isabella is based upon the church's opinion of her, which outweighs that of any historian in my mind.
Okay.
So it's easy for me to have an opinion on Isabella.
Okay. Maybe I picked the wrong person then, but...
No, I mean, she's fine. Take anybody you like. And obviously I have more opinions the closer they come to our own time. Partly because the results of what they have done become more and more manifest.
Mm.
In other words, everything that's ever come before us has an effect on us now. But the further back in time, the less easy it is to see the specifics.
I see.
So, yeah, Henry II had a direct effect on us. What it is, I don't know.
I see.
But Henry VIII also had a direct effect on us, and that I can see.
Yeah.
You understand me?
I understand now.
And so when you take two characters like Henry II and St. Thomas of Becket, not that I want to bag on them, well, St. Thomas of Becket is a saint, so he gets a plus anyway. But more than that, they're both Catholic, they're both believers. Their conflict was personal. It wasn't ideological, except in the sense that, I mean, Henry obviously wanted control over the church in a way that was improper, but that was a personal desire, not part of some great ideological construct. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
And it becomes it's very difficult to make judgments in terms of personal disputes.
Okay.
Ever hear the phrase, he said, she said?
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got a married couple of friends of yours. He complains about her, she complains about him, separately, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Two things come to mind. One is, so often it sounds like they're the same person complaining about the same person. That's the one thing. The second thing is, you don't know. You weren't there.
Okay.
And the fun part is when they expect you to form an opinion based upon what they've told you. And then when you say, well, you know, I probably should hear so-and-so side too. And here's so-and-so side. And again, so that's why you're getting a lot of I don't know, or I don't have an opinion.
Okay.
What's next?
Michael Hansinger asks, I would be very interested to hear Mr. Coulombe's thoughts on Russia, Vladimir Putin, and Alexander Dugin. Also, does Mr. Coulombe believe that the East, Russia, and the Orthodox Slavs are the last bastions of Christian society? I guess we'll take this one at a time. So let's start.
I'd like to hear what he's. Oh, me too. Okay, what else?
But yeah, so let's start with Russia and Vladimir Putin.
All right. Well, Russia, we know, has a very key place in the future. We know this only because 100 years ago, a lady said that Russia would be converted. She's not said that of any other country. So that by itself implies a particular mission for Russia.
Didn't she say, "My immaculate heart will triumph"?
In the end, yes.
And the implication was that was for Russia.
Well, her immaculate heart will triumph, but it's intimately connected to Russia.
Oh, okay.
The conversion of Russia and the triumph of her immaculate heart. And there will be a period of peace.
Wow.
Notice it's not the end of the world.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
There'll be a period of peace.
Okay.
Now, that shows that there is indeed a special destiny for Russia. And if I recommend Vladimir Solovyev's book, Russia and the Universal Church, which came out in 1900, 17 years earlier, but spoke about within a Catholic context, of the possibly providential role of Russia in Catholic history. As far as Putin goes, well, I'm of two minds. A lot depends on whether or not Putin is sincere. If he believes what he says about Russia being the bastion of Christianity in the Near East, and of Christian values and this sort of other thing, and talking about Catholicism as the great ally against corruption and so on and so on. If he believes all that stuff, then he is one of the greatest statesmen alive today. If it is all a cynical maneuver,
yeah,
then he's not. Which is he? I don't know.
I hardly recommend the Putin interviews. I watched them in June. They were on Showtime On Demand. They're 4-hour-long interviews, but Oliver Stone did them with Putin, and that was fascinating. And I hardly recommend it because, I mean, we deserve to know what Putin is like from his own words, rather than a characterization.
Or a caricature.
Or a caricature through the American media. We deserve to see him speak. And I think Oliver Stone did it because he was so scared that we're going to war with Russia that he wanted to create this, I wouldn't want to say dialogue, but to actually, so we can see him as a person.
Yeah. And, apparently he's had himself baptized Orthodox. Apparently he's pious. I don't know.
He's got, his house is littered with beautiful Orthodox iconography.
Yeah. Now, of course, he's also a divorcee.
Yeah.
And, he got his start in the KGB. So,
It's mixed, yeah.
We'll find out, is all I can tell you.
And the two things that fascinated me the most from the Putin interviews, which he said, he kept using the word affordable. Oh, we can't afford this. We can't afford... That was so different from any American politician. You never hear those words, oh, we can't afford this.
No, of course we can. We'll just print up more money.
And so, the second thing that he was actually really bragging about was the Russian birth rate. And so, this struck me as two objectives that American politicians don't worry about because they just kick the can down the road for these things. So either he is, to me, this tells me that he's a political tyrant, not worried about, he's not worried about re-election for either because he's a political tyrant or because he's a true statesman.
Yeah, but we'll find out which he is.
Yeah.
I don't know. So stay tuned to your news station.
The other thing too that did was fascinating. That the big takeaway is he is remarkably intelligent.
Oh well, yeah.
He yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to raise otherwise.
So anyhow,
what else you got?
Alexander Dugin.
Yeah, he is an interesting character, Russian politician. Very anti-American, very anti-Western. Kind of a crazy guy. But even crazy people have some interesting ideas.
What's his position?
Well, basically, he's sort of a neo-Slavophile. He believes that Russia has a God-given mission to evangelize the rest of the world.
I mean, does he have a role in the government? I mean,
No.
He's just a guy.
He's a politician.
Oh, he's... Okay.
He'd like a role in the government. And he's very anti-American.
Okay.
But of course, why is he anti-American? I remember, and this is part of our problem we have as Americans, I remember President Bush saying about the Muslims and so on, they hate us because we're good.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are actually other reasons one could hate the United States than that.
That reminds me of Putin. What Putin said, why we hate the Russians, it's for NATO. NATO exists because of the threat of Russia, so they have to fabricate this threat of Russia in order to keep NATO together.
Well, that's true, but I mean, there's also the fact that the pseudo-Cold War began again under Obama initially when Putin did not put in some pro-gay legislation that President Obama was personally and emotionally committed to. I don't believe Michelle Obama's a man, by the way. I think that's phony. I don't believe that.
Okay. I didn't know we were talking about her, but okay.
Well, I just thought, given a lot of people thought because of Obama's sensitivity in this area that Michelle was really a guy and the whole thing's a farce. I don't believe that.
Okay, well, good.
Yeah.
And the last part of the question was, does Mr. Coulombe believe that the East are the last bastions of Christian society?
Well, yes and no. I mean, they certainly, not just Russia or Orthodox Europe, but also those portions of Catholic Europe, Poland, Slovakia, Croatia, Slovenia, etc., that come to mind, even Czechia now. Those portions of Catholic Europe that were occupied by the communists tend to have their heads screwed on a lot tighter than we do. But the question is this the which?
Last bastions of Christian society?
In a sense. I mean, don't forget that they've had abortion legal since 1918.
Wow.
Putin
1918?
That's when the Soviets legalized it in Russia. That's why it's so commonplace, because that is gradually being leached out of them. And certainly Putin wants to end it. But they have a lot of hangovers in the communist days. That's on the one side. The other side, on the other side, they preserved a lot more Christianity, open, public, legal Christianity, than the West has. And that's a tremendous paradox for those of us who grew up seeing these God-fearing United States as the last best hope against godless communism. But, live long enough, ladies and gentlemen, and you'll find many strange contradictions in life, I promise.
Okay. JB with a question for you. I am just discovering the work of Antonio Rosmini, the philosopher and founder of the Institute of Charity, and would like to know Mr. Coulombe's take on him. What is distinctive about his work, and what has been his influence? Certain propositions taken from his work were posthumously censured by the Inquisition. How central were these to his philosophy, and what is the current status of his work?
Well, very good question. Rosmini was beatified, and those condemnations were lifted. But he's certainly, the order he founded played in London anyway a small part in my own growth, because two priests I knew very well that were Rosminians, Father Kit Cunningham, who converted a lot of people, including the Duchess of Kent, to the Catholic Church, but later was outed by himself as a former pedophile, which was quite a shock. He did this after he retired. And then Father Jean Charoux, who was French and very close to a living saint, in my estimation. His masses were something to behold. Rosmini was very much a man of his time, and what led to his condemnations were fears that he was giving in to the rationalizing currents of his day. How true that was, I don't know. But the fact that he's a blessed now speaks well for him.
What was distinctive about his work?
That's a good question. The answer is I can't tell you.
Okay. Dane E. Ryan asks, I was wondering if Charles might say a bit about George Bernanos, his life, his politics, his fiction, his aesthetics, his polemics, his philosophy of things. He seems like a rather interesting character. Maybe say something in particular about what he thought about the Spanish Civil War, since I know he wasn't typical on this for a monarchist and rightist.
Huh. Wow, that would be a whole thing in and of itself.
What he said about the Spanish Civil War?
No, everything.
Oh.
I mean, that's a big question. I mean, this would be a whole George Bernanos thing.
Okay.
But basically, Bernanos was a Catholic monarchist. He had been a disciple of Charles Maurras of l'Action Française, but he left l'Action Française because of what he considered, and it was true enough then, to be Maurras's non-believerhood. He was an incredible writer. Amongst other things, he wrote a very fine book called Diary of a Country Priest, which I recommend highly. And, to add insult to injury, he went to Spain thinking that it would be a glorious crusade, and he found something terrible, that the nationalists did some pretty awful things. And so he was not simply pro-Franco by any means. And here, ladies and gentlemen, I have to make a point about personal experience. Let's say that you could magically go back to 1864 or 5, and you were present for Sherman's march to the sea and his devastation of everything on both sides. Well, that might make a Confederate out of you. Now notice, it has nothing to do with the causes involved. It would simply be your gut reaction to seeing the march to the sea.
Yeah.
And, your immediate thought would be, well, wait a minute. President Lincoln, Honest Abe, he's supposed to be the president of truth and goodness and the American way.
That goes out the window.
And here we're doing this in Georgia. Now, contrariwise, if you had been a very devoted Confederate, and you found yourself going after a shoe factory in Pennsylvania, you might wonder. See, Bernanos purposely went into the Spanish Civil War himself and looked around and noticed what you see in every civil war there's ever been. Nastiness, bloodiness, unpleasantry. And since he mostly covered the war from the national side, that's where he saw it. And again, ladies and gentlemen, don't get me wrong. If you're going to be upset about the bombings of Dresden and Hamburg, then you should be upset about Rotterdam and London and Coventry. Of course, contrary-wise, if you're upset about Rotterdam, London, and Coventry, you should be upset about Hamburg and Dresden. You see? So, what can I tell you? He was even-handed. But a brilliant, brilliant writer, and just a great fellow all in all.
What's his philosophy of things that Mr. Ryan is referring to here? Did he have a sort of philosophy?
He sure did, but I'm afraid I can't go into the details since I don't know them.
Oh, okay.
What I can tell you is that he definitely was a believer that Catholicism ought to be the dominant philosophy in society. And of course, he was in favor of restoring the French king.
Okay. Our final question today is from Bill Granger. What is your opinion on Edgar Cayce and his predictions? Is this a case similar to Nostradamus, where his quatrains can be interpreted any way you want to prove their accuracy, or was Cayce different? Also, what does a church teach on this kind of thing?
You know, every day is Halloween for us, isn't it? All right, Edgar Cayce. They called him the sleeping prophet. And I've been nodding off a little bit because of the warmth, ladies and gentlemen. So the sleeping prophet kind of makes you feel kind of cozy right now. Edgar Cayce was a Southerner. His foundation survives today at Virginia Beach, Virginia. He would go into trances, basically. He would lie down on a couch, and people would record what he had to say after he went to sleep. And people would be brought in to be treated by him. So in other words, you'd come and you'd sit down next to him, and in his sleep state, he would tell you all about your illness and what you had to do to recover. So that was Edgar Cayce.
How did they know he was sleeping?
Because he would go to sleep right in front of them. Or you're wondering
how do they know he wasn't play acting? Close your eyes and pretend you're sleeping, but say this stuff. I don't understand.
Have you ever heard of faith? Obviously not.
What? Yeah.
Obviously not.
What?
No, Edgar Cayce made a number of predictions as well from his spirit guides. He believed in reincarnation, so for any Catholic, that's enough to send you running to the hills. But he believed that Atlantis would rise again in 1968. Why are you laughing?
Atlantis. Oh, man.
Lost Atlantis.
That reminds me of Soul and Church. Every single book, the Soul and Church has to bring up Lost City of Atlantis.
Yeah, Lost Atlantis. Why not?
Did Lost Atlantis exist?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
But some people write about it.
They do. They do. I don't know. Maybe. Could be.
You don't believe those people that wrote about it?
The thing is that the accounts differ. I will say this about that. When there's that much legendary, that much folklore, I always think there's got to be something to it. Now, what is another story? But something.
If there was no Atlantis, what was the Atlantic Ocean named after?
Charles Atlas.
Atlas?
Yeah.
Well.
Maybe not.
That's a little...
Maybe not. But no, honestly, so Edgar Cayce believed Atlantis would rise. Now, you got to understand that when I saw the Cayce books, I was like 8 and 9. 7, 8, 9.
He wrote books?
Oh, yeah. And there were books written about him. Edgar Cayce, the Sleeping Prophet.
Wow. What time did he live?
He died, I think, in the early 50s.
Okay.
So late 19th century, early 20th. And he, remember that when this stuff came across my attention, we were living in the house of Criswell.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, indeed. So we had all kinds of stuff like that flying around. It was Hollywood in the 60s. So the reincarnation thing by itself should take him off. The one thing I will say, though, is that when I think of Edgar Cayce, the Sleeping Prophet, I get very nostalgic.
Why?
For Hollywood in the 60s, when I was a boy living in the Criswell house.
You earlier said his spirit guides. What are his spirit guides?
He believed he was in touch with angels or other entities on the other side of the veil. So he'd go to sleep and they would tell him things.
He said angels?
Yeah, I believe so. I could be wrong. I'm not really an Edgar Cayce expert.
What was his religious belief? He was just all over the place?
Well, he was sort of a generic Baptist of sorts.
Oh, that's kind of surprising.
He read, every year on his birthday, he would read the Bible cover to cover.
So he says. I mean...
Well, I wasn't there. I didn't see him do it. I don't know.
Okay.
He was there with Savonarola.
Okay.
Maybe Savonarola was one of his spirit guides.
Oh, man.
With Henry II and Thomas and Becket. And then Nicholas of Cusa and everybody else we were talking about. They all appeared to Edgar Cayce. I don't know. Could be true. Even Putin and Lugman, who were still alive, they appeared to Edgar Cayce then too. They hadn't been born yet.
Okay. Okay. What about the second half of the question? What does the church teach on this kind of thing? Oh.
Well, the church looks at all this stuff and says, okay, what are they teaching, and how does it jibe with church doctrine? Okay.
Yeah.
If it doesn't jibe with church doctrine, then it's wrong. It's either demonic or human or something. If there are any prodigies or miracles accompanying it, the question is, are they demonic or real miracles or human subterfuge? And the church attempts to find out. So now you know.
Now, how does it jive with? How does the church's teaching jive with Lost City of Atlantis rising?
There is no dogmatically defined teaching, and in fact, since you bring it up, there was a tremendous organization in Paris-le-Monial in France, site of the cultus of the Sacred Heart, called the Institut des Fastes, which is the Institute of Fasts. They had other names. They're completely Catholic, approved by Leo XIII, and one of their interests was whatever cultural remnants there are or may be in the West from the lost city of Atlantis.
There we go.
So, do you feel better now?
I feel better.
All right.
Okay, there we go.
They believed that all language, for instance, came from an original speech, which was the speech of Atlantis.
Wow. Okay.
See,
good to know.
Just because I don't know everything doesn't mean I don't know some things. That's a double negative. Anyway, so that's where we are.
Yeah.
So have we answered all the questions?
We're done.
Are you all in touch with my feelings? I sure hope so. After that lot, I don't want to be in touch with them anymore. I'm tired of my feelings. I find them very boring. No, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, and it's so important today, where everyone is demanding that you, A, take a stand on everything, and then be willing to either shoot the next guy or insult him over it. Don't do that. Don't do that. Form opinions when you know what you're talking about. Don't feel you have anyone to impress. If you don't have an interest in something, if it's not important to you, or if you just don't know enough about it, for heaven's sake, say that. Because you know what? If you'll do that, then maybe at some point you can learn enough to have an opinion about it.
That reminds me of something that St. Teresa of Avila said, kind of related. One of the worst things, at least in the spiritual life, is thinking that you have virtue, which you actually don't.
Yeah.
Because then you'll never acquire it.
Exactly.
And same thing with these opinions. If you have an opinion, you don't need to
know anymore. You already know.
You already know. Exactly.
But if you will never acquire knowledge if you don't admit you don't have it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if tomorrow, if probably on all these characters, if I had known, ladies and gentlemen, who I was going to be questioned on, I might have done some more research on them. This is all off the top of my head. I might have done some extra research in order to maybe try to come up with an opinion. Although, that would have been stupid too. Why? Because a decent opinion you don't acquire from a Wikipedia search. You acquire it from years of study and meditation. And that, of course, we only apply to the things that are most important to us. You're not, you know, if I say, who did you prefer, L. Frank Baum or, Lewis Carroll? Did you prefer Dorothy or Alice?
I don't know the first name that you said. I don't even know that person.
L. Frank Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, okay.
So you prefer The Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland? Gotta have an opinion. Gotta right now. Gotta know it.
I don't want to.
Now, especially if you haven't read either one.
Yeah.
Then that's... Now, you could hurry and read both and come back to me with an opinion. But why would you do that? It's not important to you anyway. I mean, presuming it's not important to you. Maybe it is. But,
Right.
although, before we go, you know, it just occurred to me, since I mentioned L. Frank Baum, and since we're getting in this weird Edgar Cayce Halloweenish period, I've got a weird story about L. Frank Baum.
Okay.
All right. L. Frank Baum wrote The Wizard of Oz and a whole long series of Oz books, almost none of which are read today by most people. But The Wizard of Oz is still read. Well, it so happened that they decided they were going to make the famous 1939 Wizard of Oz. And as you might guess, they got a costume lady. And the costume lady was running around all the used clothing shops in Hollywood, trying to find clothes for different characters. One of the things she acquired was a tailcoat for the wizard, for Frank Morgan,
Yeah.
who played the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
So you remember he was wearing a tailcoat. Well, she had to actually go out and buy one. They didn't just grow on trees in those days, unlike now. She does. She goes to a secondhand store. She finds a tailcoat that is Frank Morgan's perfect size.
Yeah.
She buys it, she gets it back to the studio, and then she sees in the on the pocket, L. Frank Baum.
Wow.
Isn't that weird?
That's divine providence.
Or something. Or something. Whatever it is, it was bloody weird.
Yeah.
That was the author of the book's tailcoat.
Wow.
So when you see The Wizard of Oz, ladies and gentlemen, and you see the wizard doing his thing, that's L. Frank Baum's tailcoat he's wearing.
That's incredible.
Isn't that freaky?
That is.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, as the late, great Frank Edwards used to say, the author of a series of books I read at the same time I read Edgar Cayce, Strange World, Stranger Than Science, Strangest of All, who was a good friend of Criswell, just so you know. He made a point of saying...
What? He made a point of saying...
You know, I just blanked. He made a point of saying something or other, and it was very apropos. At any rate, the titles of his books tell it all. Strange World. It's one we live in, ladies and gentlemen. And on that, believe me, I have an opinion.
See you next time.
Until then.